on, everybody everywhere? How are you guys doing? I know it's been a week. Let me explain. Now, last week I went on vacation to a little town known as Dayton, Ohio. I saw some friends, I saw some family friends, and it was a lot of good fun. The funny thing about it is when you go from small town to big town to small town, you kind of realize there's not much to do there. But, you make the best with what you have. And I got a lot of food and I saw a lot of friends. And I can't really complain about those two. It was a good time. It was a refreshing time. It was much needed because I had been slaving away the entire summer. But, you got to realize where your limits are and put some limits on yourself so that you can enjoy life a little bit. And that's not to say that I don't love making these podcasts, but that's all besides the point. So for this show today, I want to talk about stuff that happened a little bit ago. David Griffin and his Sports Illustrated article that came out that was really about the Pelicans, but then mainstream media for like 3 days twisted it into him saying that he was dissing LeBron when that wasn't the case. I also want to talk about the NBA.com all-decade teams that came out, and I kind of want to fix things there because they just messed it all up. Then I want to talk about Tate Martell, Dak Prescott, and the NBA schedule. So with that being said, let's just dive into what David Griffin said. So in his Sports Illustrated article, he was talking about how building around LeBron can be tough. And people took it the wrong way. A lot of people were saying that, David Griffin is dissing LeBron. LeBron's the only reason he has a title. And let me set this straight for you guys. David Griffin in the article wasn't dissing LeBron James because that would be dumb. He was talking about the reality of building around LeBron. LeBron would only sign these one-and-one deals, which would then mean, I'm here for this year, but I can't tell you about next year. Do you know how hard it is for a general manager to try to build a team around somebody that's not committing to the long term? You never know whether you get to keep or you have to trade your draft picks because LeBron's putting that external pressure on you. You never know what free agents to go after because you never know how long LeBron's going to be there. And so it creates this dynamic that was tough, and that's what David Griffin was talking about. And it kind of brought my mind back to mid-season. Bleacher Report came out with an article, and the headline was, KD calls LeBron toxic. And it kind of brought me back to that space because you remember in that article, KD didn't call LeBron toxic. He's talking about the media coverage around LeBron is toxic. And this situation reminded me of that because the media loves to twist and spin things so that people are either for LeBron or against LeBron. You can never just be completely neutral on who LeBron James is. You can say LeBron James is the best basketball player ever, while also saying that being around him is tough because he's not the best teammate. Michael Jordan wasn't the best teammate. Heck, Michael Jordan punched Steve Kerr in the face. But he's still widely known as the best player of the 90s and to some the best player of that decade and the world. So KD calls the media coverage around LeBron toxic. David Griffin says it's extremely hard to build teams around LeBron because he never commits long term. And then the media spins what David Griffin said into him slighting LeBron and questioning who LeBron is and questioning LeBron's ability to win. I just find the whole situation funny. David Griffin is saying, to reiterate this, that it's hard to build around LeBron. It's hard because he's never committed long term, especially in Cleveland. And that you never knew what draft picks you had to trade or keep. You never knew what free agents to go after because LeBron was only committed for 1 year. And each year, your priority was re-signing LeBron. So it creates this dynamic that's unsustainable. So with LeBron, you get these teams that are good for 2 or 3 years, but you don't have that sustained level of greatness like San Antonio and now Golden State. You don't have those levels of sustained greatness because Tim Duncan wasn't on the books every single year. Tim Duncan wasn't a free agent every single year. Steph Curry's not going to be a free agent every single year. Draymond Green and Klay Thompson aren't. The Warriors can somehow, plan for the future instead of saying, oh, we got to bring back LeBron as soon as possible. And that's what was going on in Cleveland. Now, for the Lakers, it's a bit different because LeBron signed a 4-year deal there. And so he gave them that 4-year window. I just find it funny that LeBron gave one of the most incompetent franchises of the last decade a longer window than the window David Griffin had. And David Griffin has proved that he knows what he's doing, especially with this New Orleans rebuild. They got rid of AD. They brought in all the Lakers' young core. They signed JJ Redick. They somehow landed Zion. And things are looking up. And so, again, David Griffin isn't saying LeBron's not a winner or LeBron's toxic in the same way KD wasn't saying. What he's saying is that the media coverage around LeBron is toxic. It creates a hard team dilemma. Teams take sides. And LeBron never wanted to commit long term. And all of those things are facts. So I just needed to get that out there because I found that completely ridiculous. People were spinning the story in the wrong direction when, in fact, that story was just completely about the Pelicans. And then they asked a little bit about David Griffin's past in Cleveland. And so that's what that was. Now, NBA.com released the all-decade teams. And so what they did was they separated the teams into first team, second team, and third team. And so NBA.com's list reads as this. On the first team, you have Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard. That's your first team all decade. On second team all decade, you have Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis, Blake Griffin, and Carmelo Anthony. That's the second team. Third team all decade, you have Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant, Paul George, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, decent list. Decent list depends on what your criteria is, because my criteria is just that if we're arranging the top 15 best players of the last decade, then a couple players have to go. One of them being Kobe Bryant and LaMarcus Aldridge. So those are the two players I feel that don't belong on the top 15 players list, and I think that they'd be arranged a little bit different. So my first team all decade, so this is mine, reads as Steph Curry, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant. My second team reads as Kawhi Leonard, Dwayne Wade, Blake Griffin, Carmelo Anthony, and Paul George. Third team all decade reads as Chris Paul, Klay Thompson, Anthony Davis, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Kyrie Irving. Now, I know you guys may be saying you only put Russell Westbrook there because he's your favorite player and he played for your favorite team during the decade. And I'm saying no. I put Russell Westbrook in the first team all decade because he has over 16K points, over 4K rebounds, and an NBA Finals appearance. I put him over Kawhi Leonard for these few things. Is that Kawhi Leonard has not been doing it longer in this decade than Russell Westbrook has. Now, I understand Kawhi Leonard has 2 championships, 2 finals MVPs, and he brought a championship to Toronto. That's great, but that's also team achievements as well. Russell Westbrook, within the decade, has 16,281 points, 4,960 rebounds as a guard. That's more than Anthony Davis, as well as he averaged a triple-double for 3 straight seasons, breaking Oscar Robertson's record. So if you don't have him in your first team all decade based on his individual accomplishments alone, then I think you're just wrong. There's no way you can deny that Russell Westbrook deserves to be on the first team all decade. So second team all decade is Kawhi Leonard, Dwayne Wade, Blake Griffin, Carmelo Anthony, and Paul George. We've been over that. And I told you why I put Kawhi Leonard on the second team all decade. Because although Kawhi is the best two-way player in the league, however, he hasn't been doing it and being at the top of the NBA for nearly as long as cats like Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Steph Curry, LeBron, and KD. Kawhi's decade is like Chris Paul's decade. He comes in the middle of the 2010s and he'll be done near the middle or end of the 2020s. So he kind of branches 2 decades. So the problem with that is that you're not necessarily dominant in one, but then you're also not necessarily dominant in another. Your prime is somewhere in the middle, and you end up splitting the decade, so it's hard to pick which decade team you belong to. And so Kawhi Leonard is second team. I put Dwayne Wade second team instead of third team because of who Dwayne Wade is. And if you look at the 2011 through 2014 years, Dwayne Wade was still really good at basketball. Heck, when he retired last year, he was still really good at basketball. And I think that the second best shooting guard of all time, because frankly, in my opinion, it goes Jordan, Dwayne Wade, Kobe. But that's besides the point. But Dwayne Wade belongs on the second team all-decade team for the sole fact that he was part of that era of the initial big threes. I get it, Boston did it in 2008, but LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh in Miami made it cool. And that revitalized the NBA. That changed the NBA and eventually led to that Warriors dynasty that now saw Kevin Durant leave. And so that's why Dwayne Wade is on my second team all decade. Another player that I bumped up from third team to second team is Paul George. Now, I couldn't understand why they had Paul George on the third team all decade. Maybe it's because he doesn't have any finals appearances, whatever. But this is the same cat that was going toe-to-toe with LeBron through 2012 to 2014. The same guy. And then he had that leg injury that kept him out for a year. And then he came back. He was still the same Paul George. And then last year, he just wrapped up a career year where he had career highs across the board in efficiency and shooting. Paul George deserves to be on the all-decade second team for the fact that he pushed that Miami Heat team in their prime to 7 games. Broke his leg, came back, not only was the same player, but was a better player. So Paul George, you can go ahead and have second team all decade. Then Blake Griffin and Carmelo Anthony, we both know what they brought to the table within the decade. Carmelo Anthony was a routine 26-6. And so obviously people are downplaying how good he used to be. But that's just the reality of when you get old in the NBA. Blake Griffin changed the Clippers franchise. He was their beacon of hope, and he kind of signaled that change in the Clippers, that we're going to go from being the NBA laughingstock to being a serious contender. And though he never won anything in LA, he kind of changed that whole mantra about the franchise, laid the foundation for what is there now, being Kawhi and Paul George. So Blake Griffin is on the second team all decade, and frankly, I think he's a bit underrated in his abilities. With that being said, let's talk about the third team all NBA. So on this team, I dropped off Kobe Bryant, and I'm not a Kobe hater. I just think that if you look at it in reality and don't throw a bone to Kobe, Kobe wasn't the same player once he came back from his Achilles. Then he hurt his patella, which kept him out for basically 2 years. And by the time he came back, those last 2 years in the NBA, he was just a shot chucker. He was an inefficient scorer. And yeah, he had 60 whenever he retired, but he wasn't a great player anymore. And there's a reason that he retired. So from basically 2013 to 2016, Kobe was not that good, and the Lakers were not that good. So I don't understand how you can put somebody on an all-decade team because they were good for 3 years within that decade. So 2010 to 2013. If that were the case, then Derrick Rose deserves to be on an all-decade team because he was good for 3 years within the decade, but he's not on an all-NBA team for the decade because of the fact that his greatness wasn't built in with longevity within the decade. And so that's why I left Kobe Bryant off. So my third team, again, is Chris Paul, Klay Thompson, Anthony Davis, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Kyrie Irving. Now let me explain myself. I dropped Chris Paul from second team to third team because of the fact that he splits the decade. Now, if you want really good Chris Paul, then you have from his rookie year till about 2014. That's really good Chris Paul. But that's more of the 2000s than the 2010s decade. Then you have current Chris Paul, where you see him with his Houston Rockets iteration. And he's still a good player. But is he second team all decade good? I don't think so. And so I had to drop him down for that just because of the fact that he splits the decade. Then Klay Thompson. I dropped Kobe off the list and added Klay Thompson because Klay Thompson was part of that backcourt that revitalized the NBA, that changed the way that the NBA is played. So if Steph Curry is first team, Klay Thompson is third team to me because those two guys completely changed the way NBA basketball is played, and that has now trickled down into youth basketball where you can go into camps anywhere, and the first shot a lot of kids take is a three. That's because of Klay and Steph. And if a guy that can change the NBA isn't on an all-decades team, then you've done it wrong. The third guy on the third team all-decade team, Anthony Davis, I put him there solely based on talent. My bone to pick with Anthony Davis isn't that he hasn't done anything. Like, he hasn't won a lot. He's put up numbers on really bad teams, and then he was kind of a horrible teammate last year. So it's tough for me to put him on an all-decades list because what has he done? But that's just a reality that I was going through NBA players that were good for the last 10 years. And there weren't 15 players that would go by before I can name Anthony Davis. Then Giannis, well, he's just Giannis. And we all know that Giannis is rising as a star. And he definitely deserves third team all decade. And then the last player on this all-decade team, people might have a bone to pick with me, is Kyrie Irving. Now, hear me out. People left Kyrie Irving out of the all-decade team, but I couldn't name 15 players that were better than Kyrie Irving in the last decade. I mean, this guy was part of a team that went to 3 straight NBA finals within the decade. Part of the same team that came back from a 3-1 deficit. Part of the same team that had 2 stars drop 40 plus in consecutive games in the NBA finals, and he was one of those stars. He also hit the shot that won the Cleveland Cavaliers their first NBA championship. How can you leave a guy like that off of an all-decade team? Because you can't tell the history of the NBA in the last decade without mentioning Kyrie Irving. And so that's why he deserves that last spot on my 3 all-decades teams. Wow, that was a lot. That was a lot of lists, but I'm glad it's done. That actually took a lot of thinking and brain power to try to figure out what top 15 players in the last 10 years I would organize into teams and stuff. It was just a pain, but it was also kind of fun, so I can't complain. The next thing I want to talk about is Tate Martell. If you don't know who Tate Martell is, he was a former quarterback at Ohio State University, and he transferred to the University of Miami because he felt that Ohio State had basically just given Justin Fields the starting job. Now he gets to Miami. He expects to play. He hasn't played in the last 3 years. I mean, in terms of not playing, he hasn't started. And so he's excited at Miami. And then a couple days ago, everybody gets the news that he wasn't named the starter, and he'll be headed into the year as the second string quarterback. And at first, everybody doesn't understand it because then he skips practice because he's so upset. He's reported back at practice now, but that initial practice after being named second string, he skips it. And the thing about Tate Martell that we have to understand is that it's not that he's a bad quarterback. He was a 4-star quarterback when he got to Ohio State. And if you guys watch QB1 Beyond the Lines, it gives you some insight into who he is. Now, I don't know Tate Martell personally. I just watched Quarterback 1 Beyond the Lights, and I kind of can deduce who he is. But at the same time, I believe that if cameras followed all of us around everywhere, we'd find stuff about ourselves that we didn't like. But to me, in this docuseries, he came off as kind of a jerk that loves to talk a lot. And in high school, he was backing up that talk. And then when he got to college, things kind of changed. That's how it came off to me. And guys that can't back up the talk that they talk often come off as just jerks. And the thing I want to tell Tate Martell, if I could, is that just put your head down and work. You know, he loves to talk a lot. If you follow him on Twitter, he's always saying something on Twitter. But he also loves to compete. That's another thing that I saw from that Quarterback 1 Beyond the Lights. He loves to compete. And he lost the starting quarterback job, competition, whatever you want to call it. He competed and he lost it. But that doesn't mean he'll never play and he can never earn that spot back. Injuries happen in football. Players aren't ready. And you can never really predict how the season will go no matter what. And so all you can tell Tate Martell for this season is stay ready. You never know when your number could be called up. The offense could be struggling. Yeah, a quarterback could get hurt. Things can happen. Stay ready. Don't have a bad attitude. Don't miss practice. And I can guarantee you, just based on the law that everything that can happen will happen, he will get an opportunity to play. And see, a lot of college football now is, I'm not going to play instantly. I'm going to transfer. And though I have nothing wrong with transferring if the school isn't a great fit for the student, because they're student athletes first. But I also think there's some continuity and something great about saying, I'm going to stick it out here and prove myself that they made the wrong initial decision, and now I'm going to stick it to them by balling out when I get my chance. And I think Tate Martell just has to stay ready. Don't lose hope. Don't get sad. Just put your head down and prove every single coach that didn't start you wrong. And so I'm saying that if you want a bit of insight in who Tate Martell is, watch Quarterback 1 Beyond the Lights Season 1. And he comes off as kind of this like jerk, arrogant guy, but you also see that work ethic that he has. And if he applies that work ethic in the right way, stays ready, stays hungry, his time will come. Just don't miss practice, because that doesn't make it look any better. Keeping on this football trend, I want to talk about Dak Prescott asking for $40 million per year. Dak Prescott asked for $40 million per. And so the media is putting it as, do you pay Dak or Zeke? And I think, in my opinion, this is a straightforward answer. All of them are saying you can win with running back by committee, but you can't win if you don't have a quarterback. That's why you have to pay Dak. And I'm saying, do we forget the Broncos that had that defense that carried them to the Super Bowl, beat the Panthers, when Peyton Manning couldn't throw over 10 yards accurately? Dak Prescott is not worth $40 million. And all you got to do is really look at the Cowboys' record when Zeke doesn't play. Zeke is the engine that drives that offense. Zeke gets 30 touches a game, whether that is in the rushing game or catching the ball out of the backfield. And he alleviates a lot of pressure for Dak. It's hard for me to justify paying a quarterback $40 million per that struggles to throw a pass over 20 yards accurately. Look at what the Cowboys offense was before they got Amari Cooper. They called Dak Prescott dink and dunk Dak. You're going to pay a game manager $40 million over your Pro Bowl running back who's led the league in rushing every year that he's played a full season. I think the Cowboys have to get their priorities straight. Because, yeah, you can win with running back by committee, but you also can win with a quarterback that just doesn't make mistakes. And you can find a quarterback that just doesn't make mistakes, but for a cheaper price than $40 million per year. I'm not the biggest Dak fan, and that's been noted, but I also feel that Ezekiel Elliott is a guy that makes that offense move. And without him, the Cowboys will struggle. Dak will struggle. And Jerry Jones will see that maybe Dak wasn't worth that $40 million price tag. Keeping with this football trend, let's talk about Antonio Brown. Now, if you guys have been living under a rock, Antonio Brown threatened to retire if he didn't get to play with his helmet. And then the NFL basically said, no, your helmet's 10 years old, so you're going to have to get a new one. And then Antonio Brown was in sorts, only to then play. And so, though he's hurt, he will eventually play when he's healthy. So Antonio Brown made this whole fiasco about the helmet just to lose the appeal and then say, I was just threatening to retire. Just kidding. I mean, he's smart because nobody would pass on $30 million guaranteed, but that's all besides the point. My problem with Antonio Brown isn't that he was appealing to keep his helmet. My problem with him is that he, everywhere he goes, has to be the center of the attention. And it makes you kind of rethink what happened in Pittsburgh wasn't all Ben Roethlisberger, because Antonio Brown was the one that didn't play late in the season for Pittsburgh. Antonio Brown's a guy that has to be the center of the media circus. And so at first, when that trade happened between the Steelers and the Raiders, and they gave up a 3rd and a 5th round pick for Antonio Brown, I'm thinking, is that a good trade? They just traded for Antonio Brown, yes, but he's a head case. And then I realized Antonio Brown fits in with exactly what the Raiders are. The Raiders are a circus. They're a sideshow. They don't feel as though they're even part of the NFL. They're the one team that has the poorest owner. I say poor in relative terms, obviously. But they have the alumni dinner, the Raiders this, Raiders that. They feel more of a cult than anything else. And what spews from the Raiders oftentimes is dysfunction. Maybe John Gruden will have them going in the right direction this season, but Antonio Brown fits in exactly with what the Raiders are. So Antonio Brown, yes, he's still going to be a headache for the Raiders, but they're better equipped to deal with it because of the fact that they're used to being the headache themselves. You know, like if you have somebody that's used to having headaches, when they get a headache, they won't be shocked like, oh, what do I do with this headache? The Raiders are used to having headaches on their team. They know how to stand by their headaches and defend their headaches. And Antonio Brown fits right in. So Antonio Brown won't be the problem. He's just the symptom of a team that's going to enable him to do whatever he wants. And that each team can govern their teams differently. I just think that Antonio Brown's attitude is always me. And this isn't me questioning his football ability, because he is one hell of a football player, one hell of a wide receiver. But it's always going to be about Antonio Brown, no matter if the team is winning or losing. When the team's winning, it's going to be because of Antonio Brown. And when the team's losing, it's going to be not because of Antonio Brown. It's going to be because AB's showing up and nobody else is. That's just how he is. And this helmet thing kind of reiterated that everything is about him. It's going to be an interesting year for the Raiders. I'm still going to draft Antonio Brown if he's on the board in fantasy. I hope that frostbite thing going on with his feet gets sorted out. But just to reiterate what I was saying, Antonio Brown fits in with the Raiders because the Raiders are used to having headache. John Gruden and the Raiders knew what they were signing up for when they brought Antonio Brown in. And so they expected something like this. With Antonio Brown, it's always about him. And how the Raiders can coexist in that atmosphere is going to be something to watch. I can't wait for it. But speaking on things to watch, the NBA schedule got released a few days ago, and I have 10 games that I can't wait to see. And so, with that being said, I have this list. I know I'm not a big fan of lists, and I've had a lot of lists in this podcast, and that's on me. But there was no better way to really do it, so I just kind of did it like a list. Going from 1 to 10 on, they're not really organized by date, but why I wanted to see this game and all that other good stuff. So number 1 is going to be opening night, and that's the Clippers-Lakers. And it's round 1 of this battle for LA. Now, we know the media is going to push this whole battle for LA, which team is better and why this team is better. And I think that's just going to be a great game to watch, because although Paul George might not be healthy with the shoulder, we get to see LeBron versus Kawhi, and we also get to see how the LeBron-AD pairing will look. So that's on opening night, and that's number 1 on my list. The next game that I really can't wait to see is the Clippers-Warriors game, October 24th. And the reason I can't wait to see this game is because everybody's written off the Warriors. They said Kevin Durant jumped ship and they're no longer going to be a dominant team, all this stuff. Klay Thompson could be back by March. And I honestly think that the D'Angelo Russell, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson pairing is going to be really good, because all those guys can hit threes at a prolific rate. They can create their shot. And then they have their engine still there in Draymond Green that keeps the team going. So I just kind of want to see this new iteration of the Warriors, because I don't believe that the Warriors are done. They're headed into a zone where I think they're going to be more of the Spurs, continuously good for the next 10, 15 years. Might win a couple more championships. Maybe they won't go to 3 straight finals, but they're still going to be a good team. The third game I can't wait to see is the Clippers-Rockets, November 13th. And this is a game where Paul George might be back. We don't know exactly his shoulder timeline, but the game is set up to be who has the better duo, since the NBA is all about duos. And we get to see that Rockets duo in their first primetime game. So that's going to be exciting to see. Then the next game is the Nets versus the Celtics, November 27th. And that's Kyrie's return to Boston. And I just want to see how the Boston fans treat him, especially because it was around this time last year that Kyrie said, I'm going to re-sign in Boston, and then proceeded to be uninterested the rest of the season. So that's going to be a good one. Number 5 on the list is the Lakers versus the Pelicans, November 27th as well. And that's AD's return to New Orleans, a franchise that he spurred for Los Angeles. And he talked about how he just wanted out. And I think that's going to be a really good game with a lot of emotions, because Anthony Davis invested a lot of his younger years in New Orleans. And New Orleans has now built a really good team. They, if given time, will be able to compete. So that's going to be a good one. Number 6, keeping on this returns trend, is December 11th, Clippers versus Raptors. And that's Kawhi's return. And I just want to see how Kawhi's accepted by the Toronto fans, because I don't think there's any disdain for Kawhi. I think it'll be cheers, especially because he's a guy that brought them their first championship. Obviously, number 7 is all the Christmas Day games, because if you're not watching basketball on Christmas Day, you're not doing Christmas right. Number 8, and this one hits hard for me, is going to be Houston versus Oklahoma City, January 9th. And that's going to be Westbrook's first game back in Oklahoma City, playing in the peak. And it's going to be a weird vibe, because though Oklahoma City fans aren't going to boo Russell Westbrook, we still hate the Houston Rockets. So it's tough. But I think Russell Westbrook will be applauded, because nobody wants to be the fan that boos Russell Westbrook and then everybody's looking at you funny. Hopefully the Thunder win that game. I doubt it. I don't know how good Chris Paul is going to be this year. I don't know how many minutes guys like Hamidou Diallo are going to get. And I'm going off a rabbit trail, obviously. But let's bring it back. Number 9 on the list is Nets versus the Golden State Warriors. And that's D'Lo playing the team that traded him. And I feel that D'Lo has it out for at least like the Lakers and the Nets, because both of those teams gave up on him too early. And I'm happy that the Warriors are actually going to invest in him, because he was a first-time All-Star last year and has the potential to be a really great player if a team just sticks with him. And then number 10 on that list is the Jazz Grizzlies, November 15th. And that's Mike Conley returning to Memphis, a team that he gave it his all for nearly a decade. And so those are the 10 games I can't wait to watch. I'm probably going to watch more because I'm addicted to basketball. And League Pass is such a blessing when it works. And half the time it doesn't work because of stupid blackout restrictions and such. But nonetheless, the NBA schedule came out. I'm excited for the NBA season. I'm excited for the NFL season. Fantasy football starting up here pretty soon. So I can't wait to have another average year. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. But with all that being said, if you've made it to this point in the podcast, you've made it to the end. The Vertical Jump podcast is something produced by me, written by me, spoken by me, whatever, hosted by me. And if you enjoyed anything that you heard here today, and if I entertained you in some way, make sure to subscribe to this podcast, whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, YouTube. Subscribe to this podcast. We release podcasts every Wednesday. as well as follow me on social media. My Instagram is IAN_KAYJAY, and my Twitter is at IANKAY. So make sure to follow me on socials. That's how you can interact with me. And I can't wait to hear from you guys again. I'm sorry for the wait that it took me a week off when I went on vacation. But as always, thanks for listening. May the rest of your day be the best of your day. Love y'all.